evening, everybody. Welcome. I think we're gonna give it a minute or two just for some more people to join because from what it looks like, there was more people that are meant to be here. We'll give it a minute or two, but thank you all for coming tonight. We are going to dive deep into your genome. I know that Jana and I spoke, it's been a few months ago, and some of you were there to hear what we had to say, and then wanted to go on this journey with us. So thank you for all being here. You're gonna love it. You're gonna get a lot of value. If you don't already have this in front of you, I would suggest open up your report. If not, grab a pen and pencil to make notes. But if you do have your report in front of you, we won't spend a lot of time diving into the report. We're going to be speaking, the whole intention of tonight is to talk about things that you can't find in the report. There's insights that we have, there's things that we know that we aren't necessarily allowed to hand over to somebody, when it comes to whether it's aging, diseases, etc. We're going to dive into some of those things. So have it open just so you can reference and know who you are amongst these various profiles we're going to talk about. But we're going to spend more time just talking. We also want to make sure there's time for Q&A. So we'll give you the last little bit of this to ask your questions. So as we're going through, keep making your notes and we'll save those for the end. And we'll dive into all those questions together to make sure anything we didn't cover gets covered. So again, the intention tonight, we'll give another minute, maybe till 6:05 for everyone else to join. The intention tonight is going to go dive deep into your reports, and we're going to try and talk about the insights or the why behind what you're seeing in the reports. Why are we saying what we're saying? So that you then become armed with this tool to then go utilize to solve problems that may not even be in the report. If you understand how your genome works, and you can then interpret that and apply that to other things you may be dealing with or wanting to improve, or wanting to teach to your children or to your parents, well, then that's the goal of tonight, is to arm you with that information. So we're going to start by looking at mood and behavior, your inner workings of your brain. This is important because if you don't understand how you perceive the world, and also how the world perceives you, if you're working with a clinician or a coach, etc., it may be difficult to understand how to solve your problem. And we often find that when we're working with things like, chronic in nature, where they've been going on for a long time, or it's a burdensome, or it's being ignored and procrastinated, a lot of these aren't the problem themselves, but it's how you think. And so by teaching you how you think and arming you with your superpower, that cognitive superpower, it allows you to deal with any future problem and find out really who you are. It's that self-actualization we're going to go through tonight. So to do this, I'm going to speak about each gene and in that mood and behavior report. And I'm going to tell you what it does and then how that leads to your mood and behavior outcome. So starting with DRD2, which is your dopamine response. And when we look at DRD2, what we're really looking at is the density of receptors in your brain. So anyone that experiences pleasure, reward, eat some tasty food, go achieve something, win something, you require dopamine in order to experience that sense of satisfaction. I got it, that hit. This is why these things are so addictive. And this is why certain foods or drinks can be so addictive, because you want more of that hit. It's a good place to be in terms of mood. Now, the way you experience it, again, DRD2 determines the density of the receptors in your brain. So we all deploy dopamine, we all bind dopamine, and we experience that satisfaction from either pleasure or reward. The central outcome is satisfaction. To what intensity do we feel it is based on the density of these receptors. How long does it last is based on a gene called COMT, which you'll also see in your report, COMT. In between, there's a gene called MAO, which we won't touch on. It's more of a supportive character here. But COMT and DRD2 are the main things we're going to look at. So if you see the GG or AG DRD2, it means you're clearing you're binding your dopamine a little less intensely. And so the ability to experience that reward is of a lesser degree. If you see an AA, it means you have the, sorry, I'm saying this backwards because I'm looking at a different report. AA, you would have the lowest expression of the receptor, and GG is the highest expression of the receptor, right? So the expression means to what degree do you bind. So AA means that I hardly feel, GG means I feel it a little bit too much. And this middle ground, AG, is more of this Zen kind of experience where I'm experiencing pleasure as I should. So I'm not overly seeking it and I'm not underwhelmed. So this is important because this leads to your reward seeking behavior. Now pair this with COMT, which clears the dopamine out, which brings you back to your regular state. If you have the GG ultra fast COMT, it doesn't last long enough. And so if you have a combination of low density and ultra fast clearance, depression is sort of baseline. I can't get no satisfaction. The world sucks. Nothing's good. Then all of a sudden you receive some pleasure and it becomes addiction because you need that hit. The baseline again is not good enough. So you need the hit. Then it becomes, sorry, someone else is just entering, I'll let them in. Then it becomes achievement. If you go down that entrepreneurial or reward seeking avenue, because ultimately you don't need pleasure and reward, you just need satisfaction, one of the two. And this is a very healthy way to deal with this, is to seek a reward as opposed to satisfaction from pleasure. So now the opposite is also true. If you have the ultra slow DRD2 or clearance, sorry, which is the AA, right? And you have the ultra dense DRD2, which is the GG, then all of a sudden it's a little too easy to experience pleasure. And you're not really pursuing it because you're satisfied constantly. And you may become more of a naysayer. You may say that I'm not interested, or yeah, I heard about that TV show, I don't really care. But when you find that thing that you truly value and enjoy and get that additional lift from, it becomes a binge. And a binge is a whole other form of problematic behavior. It's very different than addiction. Addiction is, I need to do this on time every day or I get frustrated. My day is planned around this thing and I have to do it. Binging is, I don't need it, but when I do it, I'm gone. It's 8 episodes of Netflix, right? That's binging. So in between these two, you can start to put the pieces together of how, you know, if you're more of these Zen states for both, that's the ideal place to be. I experience pleasure and reward as it should be, and it lasts the right duration. So I'm very healthy in terms of when I seek reward. Picture the nurse, you know, the nurse that is just dependable, will get it done. She's not going to go build a nursing practice and be highly entrepreneurial. She also is not going to flake out and not get it done. She will do what needs to be done as per the job calls for, a dependable level of reward and pleasure. Same thing when it comes to pleasure. So now we're going to layer on top of this other neurochemicals. And again, make note, if you have personal questions about any of these things, make note of them. We'll get to all those at the end. We move on to ADRA2B, ADRA2B, which speaks to your noradrenaline response. And in a nutshell, what we're talking about is your ability to, as opposed to what we just said, how do you experience? It's how do you recall? So that imprint that happens from a moment of stimulus, is it happening, that imprint, to a degree that's somewhat more intense or somewhat more forgettable, right? That this feeling that I experience, this trauma, this fight, this extreme laughter, some stimulus that's adrenaline inducing, to what degree do I remember the feeling, that imprint? And if your ADRA2B is deleted, which we look for, and this is a different type of variant, it's not a SNP, you know, where there's a spelling mistake, it's more like a section of the gene is missing. So if you see the DD, that speaks to high propensity towards PTSD, trauma, right? Not necessarily yet meaning or impact, just the feeling, which means I remember the next time I talk to that person again, the next time I walk down that street again, the next time I hear that sound again, the feeling comes back as if it just stopped. It's a continuation, right? Now the II is like, I don't remember the feeling. I remember the information. I remember what you said. I remember what it smelled like. I remember the weather, but it's not a big deal. Let's move on. They don't hold the grudge. Right now, so a cofactor to this, just like dopamine, we could look at intensity. To what degree do I feel that pleasure and reward? That sort of speak to how much I pursue it and how much I say no to it. And then there's the clearance. The same clearance protein, COMT, also clears noradrenaline. So we can also start to look at, to what duration did I actually experience this trauma-inducing moment? So if I am that DD that feels it all, holds it all, remembers it all, the recall is intense, and my COMT is really slow, then it's going to be more problematic and probably symptomatic. Right? Because not only do I remember, but I remember everything about it. Right? Now, the opposite, when the COMT is quick, and you're clearing that moment. Yes, I remember the feeling. I might be a DD or an ID. I remember the feeling, but when your comp is quick, you're a little bit confused about the details because you weren't in the moment long enough. And this is a very big source of friction. Imagine the person who has a slow comp that remembers it all and remembers every detail and can speak them back to you. And in your case, you believe you truly remember it, but what it looks like to other people is confusion. Because that didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. And every time you talk about it, you say something a little different, right? Because it's very hard for you to remember the details because the clearance happens so quickly. So that adrenaline that your body is using to imprint to remember to protect you in the future from something similar isn't imprinting for long enough. So again, you can start to play with these pieces, this matrix of ADRA2B genes and COMP genes, and you can start to find where you sit in that matrix and understand how your brain works when it comes to trauma, holding the grudge, and also EQ, emotional intelligence. Are you more likely to be able to meet people where they're at with emotion and connect with them quickly? Because that is a tool that you use versus cold, hard logic, right? Which is maybe useful in certain settings, but in terms of relationships, etc., people might feel like you're cold, right? So you can start to toy with these and understand where you sit and why people say what they say and why you say what you say about people, right? The perception changes. So now we're moving on to serotonin, 5-HTT-LPR. This is a neurochemical and hormone that is most commonly spoken of in the context of regulating your mood. So when it comes to words like anxiety, depression, clinically, psychotherapists, psychologists will look at serotonin as a marker for how healthy you are, right? What they're not understanding is that levels in the blood don't speak to utilization, right? The actual receptor, what we've looked at is the actual gene that determines the length of the receptor. And so to what efficiency do you actually utilize serotonin in that moment of stimulus? So we spoke about reward. How do you pursue? We spoke about recall, right? How do you remember? Now we're speaking about the intensity of stimulus and your brain's ability to prioritize it. If you are in that moment of sound, smell, noise, whatever, we are here tonight spending time together. If somebody walked by behind me right now, would you lose focus? If I started making a weird ticking sound on my laptop, would it bother you? Or would you not even know? So the degree to which your brain can actually pay attention to the appropriate stimulus that you're supposed to be focused on versus giving attention to everything is regulated by your serotonin receptors. And so if you're not able to prioritize stimulus, it leads to those mood issues. So it's not a direct bad serotonin equals anxiety. It's no, I overthink, I overanalyze, I notice every detail, I cross every T and dot every I. When they said they're calling me at 3 o'clock and it's now 3:05, I am extremely frustrated because every detail matters versus the the opposite when the serotonin LL or the longer version of the receptor is present, all of a sudden it's all macro, it's all high level, the details really don't matter. And in fact, I probably need a team around me to handle the details. If I'm in a leadership role, I'll be a great visionary, have great things, but I'm going to forget a lot of stuff and I actually won't pay attention to things that I perhaps should. Right? So all of a sudden, your brain's ability to prioritize stimulus and this mood regulating neurochemical is highly driven by how you bind it and utilize it. So this is you start to layer these things, my dopamine response, my ADRA2B response, and noradrenaline, my serotonin, and you paint a bigger and bigger picture of your cognitive function, of your executive function. And you don't single out any one single thing. And this is why the DNA company reports don't speak to genes, they speak to problems like anxiety, procrastination, because once we start to look at these combinations, we then understand how you handle those given problems. And you now, the intention of tonight is for you to understand so that you know how to handle how you perceive and how other people perceive you, right? So you can be appropriate for the moment and get the goal you actually want. So now, last neurochemical, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. We're going to speak about TPH and how it influences it also, but really the primary role we're looking at for brain health is BDNF. BDNF speaks to BDNF levels, brain-derived neurotrophic factor levels, which ultimately at a clinical level, we apply to things like concussion because it speaks to neuroplasticity, your brain's ability to develop new neural pathways. Right? How efficiently do you make these highways where the synapses connect and information flows through and you can learn new things, do great things? and even heal and develop the brain, or the converse of that, have cognitive decline because the brain isn't repairing fast enough. So BDNF speaks to that. And if you have the GG, ultimate optimal version of BDNF, then you're probably doing a good job of developing those new neural pathways and what we call neuroplasticity, which means repair. Concussion is probably not as big of a deal. The AA would speak to the opposite. It would think that all of a sudden you don't do a good job of coming back. All of a sudden you don't do a job of learning new skills. It doesn't mean that it's affecting your intellect or your IQ. It's how you apply your brain. Are you a jack of all trades? GG, I learn new things. It's very easy for me to learn new things. I'll do the accounting, I'll do the legal, I'll do the marketing. Or are you more AA? I do this and I do it really, really well, better than most. But ask me to do the next thing and I'll probably stumble and fumble. But guess what? Once I do that thing, I'm also going to do that better than everybody else. The difference between the person that sends a yes, no problem email or the 1.5 pages where like, I didn't need that much information, right? So the depth of thought, and the GG, again, higher level, more macro in terms of the meaning that is given to things. So receiving a letter in the mail, lawyer is suing you. What's the reaction? Is it, okay, it's just another task on the pile? Or is it everybody out of here, team around me that's focused on legal, we're doing this now? That's the suboptimal BDNF. A lot of meaning. Now, if you start to combine, my noradrenaline response is off. And so I recall emotion and I imprint, especially negative stimulus, the stuff that I don't want. And my BDNF is off. So I give it a lot of meaning. That's the person where we truly talk about, clinical PTSD. They feel it, but there's also the shell shock, the ruminating, that can't stop thinking about it, right? And that's where somebody, first of all, can be very easily unravel this stuff because we now know the root cause, right? But you can also learn that the same thing that maybe thought of as a burden because of your current context and what you're dealing with is actually your superpower. When you see it in an extremely, well-celebrated author, or you see an intellectual scientist, an academic leader, or you see, somebody who's in a leadership role, perhaps, you might find that their BDNF is off. Right. And this is why they think so deep. And this is why they have a lot of meaning to things and they really give it value and give it their all. Right. And then you may see, and you might put that person in a team and all of a sudden there's dysfunction. And all of a sudden words get used that weren't used when they were working solo. Right. They were amazing at this, blinders on, let me do my job, but try and learn new things, fall apart. So you start to learn, what is my superpower? What is my kryptonite? The same cognitive profile can give me both of those. I have to be in the right context. Understand what I'm wired for and go do that and thrive. Understand what I'm not wired for and perhaps give that to someone else to do. That's not what I'm good at. Serotonin is off, high detail. Serotonin is on, macro. You start to pick these things apart and understand yourself. So before we move on to your internal cellular health, we're going to utilize these same genes to also talk about chronic sleep issues. In your report, you saw things like circadian rhythm, environmental response, food response. So I'm going to tell you not the problems, but more the profiles. There's 3 profiles. In your report, I think you saw 5 problems. Today, we're going to speak about 3 profiles, which drive those problems. I can't fall asleep. I can't stay asleep. I sleep through the night, but I'm not rested. Genetically, 3 very different things. So the same genes we just talked about, and this is why it's so important for us to teach you how to interpret versus what we say about the gene, because you can use the same gene in different contexts. Because if your serotonin is dysregulated, it's not only affecting your mood while you're awake, it's affecting your ability to sleep as well. Why? We all know that melatonin is a neurochemical and hormone that helps us fall asleep. You actually bind it, there's a signal, brain starts to shut down, you feel that tiredness and you're able to sleep. The signal, that ancestral signal, used to be when a cave person was sitting in a cave, seeing the amber glow of fire, which is what they saw every night. Pitch black, there was no pot lights, right? There was no beautiful kitchen, pitch black in the cave, amber glow of fire would trigger melatonin binding. That's why these are so useful. If you haven't seen blue light blockers, You can get them now where they have like a amber lens that can attach, which mimics that amber glow that your ancestors would have seen, which allows you to bind melatonin and fall asleep. Serotonin is the opposite. It's not your go to sleep chemical, it's your wake up chemical. And the signal is meant to be sunlight piercing in through the cave entrance into your eyelid. That peachy glow that you see signals time to bind some serotonin and wake up. Now, in order to survive, and why am I speaking about cave people? Because these are the habits that we're wired for. The genetic code that you're sitting and watching with tonight, that is driving all your biological processes, still thinks you're living in a cave. It doesn't know that you're in New York and California and Hawaii driving cars and breathing pollution and et cetera, et cetera. It still thinks that you're plucking vegetables out of ground and killing a mammoth and carving it up and eating its fat, right? That's what it thinks. So this is the context is now somebody would have had to be in the front of the cave to listen for that bear or that tiger or that whatever. And they would have survived because their serotonin is dysregulated and every single input disrupted their sleep and caused them to wake up. They are the one that survived. In today's context, that's a horrible problem because there's too much stimulus. Too hot with our beautiful blankets, too cold with our AC. You know, we have pillows that are bending our necks the wrong way. You have a duvet cover that's kind of tickling your neck. You're like, I can't focus. You know, so all these stimulus, you're in the same bed as somebody. So we have a very different context. So again, I can't fall asleep, we're going to talk about, but I can't stay asleep is more based on your serotonin dysregulation, causing you to react to every stimulus in that second half of sleep where your brain is waiting for sunlight. So remove the stimulus, remove it. Perfect temperature, separate blanket, separate bed even, you know, blackout blinds, everything you can do to not be stimulated at that time. Earplugs and eye mask if you have kids running around and a dog perhaps. Now, going back to the first, which is I can't fall asleep. This is not so much a stimulus issue. It's more a circadian rhythm issue and a mood issue. And the same gene is driving both of those. So BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. If your BDNF is off, like we said, you're much more likely to ruminate. And what is a great time for you to ruminate? When you're lying on your pillow at night, trying to fall asleep and can't stop thinking about, I wish I didn't say this. I wish I showed up 5 minutes earlier. I forgot to do this thing and I promised them. And you can't stop thinking about it. That's BDNF. And by the way, I don't want this all to be bad news. I'm going to tell you what to do about it, right? But I just want to give you the context. It's also my circadian rhythm or my clock doesn't work. Inside, we have various biological processes. Each one of them has its own circadian rhythm. There's the day-night rhythm, which tells our body when to actually be tired and fall asleep, and also when to wake up. And that's why some people don't need an alarm clock, because their circadian rhythm is so efficient. If your BDNF is off, and again, genetics is not just here's a gene. It's here's a gene, and then here's the context you're using it in. And for some things, context truly means context. Who are you surrounded by? But it also means the epigenetic factors of environment, nutrition, lifestyle. Those three inputs are also part of your context, right? And now the combination of these two things equals your net outcome. I have certain genes. When I add these habits, it's good. When I add these habits, it's bad, right? So now that's why we're going to speak to circadian rhythm. If your circadian rhythm is off and your BDNF is off, then all of a sudden not waking up on time every day, not getting sunlight in the morning, not getting appropriate vitamin D, not pausing 2 or 3 times of the day just to breathe and let your body know that the clock should be progressing, not pausing in the evening to spend time with the family, not eating on time and disrupting your metabolic health. All of these things are affecting your circadian rhythm and confusing your brain's ability to know what time it is. Again, GG-BDNF probably don't notice these things. AA, it's a difference between sleeping tonight or not. I forgot to go on my evening walk, I'm not sleeping tonight. I forgot to do my yoga, I'm not sleeping tonight. I forgot to take a hot shower in the morning, I'm not sleeping tonight because the clock doesn't work, right? So this is very important for everything because your hormones, all these various processes are also aligned to your clock and circadian rhythm. So it speaks to longitudinal health also. The last bucket of I can't fall asleep, I fall asleep, but I sleep through the night, wake up feeling not so rested, is sort of a segue to what we need to speak about next, which is your internal cellular health. In our current bedrooms, there's a few things going on that we're not wired for. We have chemical-laden mattresses, you know, memory foam, fire retardants on the surface. We have chemical laden pillows. We have beds that are on the second floor of a home that are elevated from the ground, which means we're not grounded and connected to the earth, where there's that symbiotic relationship we have with the earth, which is meant to detoxify and charge ourselves truly when you're grounded, right? So there's a few things going on that some people fare better with, and some people, just like if I don't wake up on time, my BDNF and my clock doesn't work, so I have to have the bad habit. It's the same thing with if my detox genes don't work, which we're going to get into next, then if I add the toxins, it's going to affect me much more than a normal person. So before we get into how this applies to sleep, let's look at the detox genes, so we know what we're even talking about. So I'm going to jump over to the immunity section, which may also be labeled as the inflammation section in your report. And we're going to look at the GST family of genes, GSTT1, GSTM1, and GSTP1. So GSTP1 is a first line of defense for your lungs. I'm breathing in toxins every day. How efficiently does my glutathione stores bind and utilize and eliminate those toxins for me? How well do I do that? That's GSTP1, right? And if you have the AA version, then you're doing that really well. AG minus 40%, GG minus 70%, which means these airborne molds, chemicals, going to the gas station, these insults that are coming that are inhalation based just mean a lot more, right? Second line of defense, once they get in GSTT1, TT1, you're not seeing letters, you're seeing a 0, a 1, and a 2. So what does that mean? Well, in this gene, and this is why in the DNA company testing, we don't, the way the test was built, it wasn't around more is more, which is what you usually hear. I test for 700 genes. I test for 5,000 genes. I test for 20,000 genes. How many lives have you changed? That's the important question, right? And we realize that there's far less that needs to be looked at, but for each of those genes, we need to dive deeper. And there's something called a copy number variation. So when you look at GSTT1 in a typical genetic report, it's going to give you an assumption based on an algorithm of what the copy number variation is. What does that mean? A SNP is a spelling mistake. So you saw the A's and the G's and all these letters. So sometimes it's supposed to be an A, and in that location instead it's a G, and so that gene doesn't function properly. In your noradrenaline response, we saw there's something called an insertion or deletion. So it's not just about a spelling mistake, but sometimes there's a whole cascade of letters or a paragraph missing. So the gene doesn't function even more, right? There's also something called a copy number variation, which means I don't even have the gene. There's a very variable amount of number of copies, copy number variation, missing, don't even have it. And if a gene is an instruction giving your biological function, it's literally instruction telling you what to do, and you don't have the instruction, well, you're not doing that job. And when you look at GSTT1, which is second line of defense, once the things get in, I breathe them and I eat them, etc. This is the gene that's going out, that police force in your bloodstream, looking for those toxins to bring them out and clear them to the liver and help you pee and poop them out, right? So if you're missing that gene, which a lot of people are, 0 copies, you just don't do this job. And if you have that in combination with the bad GSTP1, it's coming in and it's not leaving. Inflammation. That's the person that's lying on a memory foam mattress that as they're rolling around, popping little air bubbles and off-gassing the chemicals that are in those air bubbles and breathing them for 7, 8, 9 hours a day, every day, and doesn't understand, I don't get it. My Oura ring says I slept, but I feel horrible. That's the exact time that your body is detoxifying. The first half of sleep is recovery. All of what I subjected myself to the day before, I'm recovering, eliminating toxins and antioxidation, damage to hormones, repairing hormones. The second half of sleep is preparation. Let's get ready for the next day. Let's make the hormones I need. Let's make the neurochemicals. Let's prepare the gut. Let's do all the things I need to be ready for the next day. So if you're not, if first of all, biological function we identified may be off. So there's the red flag. Now the epigenetic habit is you haven't eliminated the threats. Your environment itself is still a threat. The mattress, the pillow, the chemicals that you clean things with, the perfume that somebody may have sprayed in their bedroom before going to sleep, whatever it is, inhalation based, that you're not able to clear, then there's no surprise as to why you wake up not feeling rested, because you never actually got rest. Your body wasn't able to go into those recovery processes. Now, the same is also true of your gut, GSTM1, M like mother. It's also possible to have a copy number variation, 0, 1, or 2 copies. But we found a unique phenomenon here. And this is why the research that was done at the DNA company was so important, because we didn't research the genes. Of course, and that's a blanket statement, meaning that, not meant to be a blanket statement. Doesn't mean we didn't research genes. What it meant is that we didn't put a hyper focus on what do these genes mean. We put a hyper focus on, now that we're understanding what these genes mean, how does it affect somebody's life? How do you apply this in clinical practice? And the way that was done was by spending 3 years with 7,000 people to understand, oh, the academic literature says that this gene is a gut detoxifier, GSTM1. It instructs glutathione of the gut. So if I eat some bad food, then all of a sudden, if I have 0 copies, I'm probably going to get leaky gut, permeability of the gut wall, colitis, Crohn's, those types of things. But if I have 2 copies, the full copies, I'm good. I'm going to be great, right? What we learned, and this is why it was so important to sit and spend time with 7,000 people, that the people that had 2 copies also weren't feeling well. So what's going on there? Why all of a sudden, when I have the best genetics, my food is the difference between I felt good today and I didn't feel good yesterday. And the difference was what I ate. Because, again, context. In everything that you're doing and applying this stuff, always remember context. Today's context, if you have a ideal version of the gut detoxification genes, and you're eating today's toxic food, which is so much more toxic than what your ancestral cave people used to eat, then the overload causes an autoimmune response, right? So 0 copies means inflammation. I'm not detoxifying, so it's causing me inflammation. 2 copies means, compare it to the cytokine storm in COVID. You go into this fight that's so aggressive that your body fights itself. And this is what's happening when you have 2 copies of GSTM1, if you're not really careful and clean about your food. And it's not just limited to the food, it's not limited to the labels. You need to understand processing. You need to understand that even if you're buying an organic box of whatever, if it's in a box, it was processed on machines. That means heavy metals. That means chemicals to clean those machines. That means plastics in the packaging that are seeping into your food, which for a person with 1 copy who's in the middle, maybe he's not going to notice a problem. But 2 copies and 1 copy, they're going to feel it. They're just going to feel something different. Inflammation versus autoimmunity, right? So it becomes very, very important, not that anybody shouldn't pay attention to their food, but in terms of chronic disease prevention and reversal, the people on either end, 0 or 2, you have to consider that every meal is a choice between good health and bad health. Literally, you're chipping away this way or you're chipping away that way based on your food choices. So be very diligent in that regard. So same thing is also true with your sleep. If you're not eating what you should be eating and you're putting yourself into metabolic disarray, don't expect to sleep properly that night. And don't expect to, even if you do sleep properly, wake up feeling like you actually got rest, because your body was struggling through the night, dealing with its metabolic systems, couldn't get into the detox and other systems. So that's how we think of those detox pathways and how they affect sleep. But we're going to talk about now how they affect chronic disease and aging. So what is aging? It's truly damage to the cells. We have 50 trillion cells that make up this human form that we walk around in. And now all of a sudden, all of these toxic insults from food to what we breathe to, take a look at this thing that I'm wearing tonight, an EMF blocker. We're inundated with EMF, electronic pollution, right? Your phone is signaling to a cell phone tower 900 times per minute, right? So whether you're using it or not, it's like you did 900 phone calls in 1 minute. That's the amount of signaling is doing to the new 5G towers, right? So we're inundated, we're constantly exposed to EMF. It's another source of inflammation of the cell. So when you think about the context we're wired for, a cave person waking up, pulling off their bearskin blanket, going out into the woods, breathing clean air, to today, where there's been 144,000 new chemicals introduced to humanity since the 1970s. Most of them, by the way, are for our food supply. There's, 30% of American water has forever chemicals in it. Your clothing has forever chemicals, the EMF, again, for the phones and all the other electronics. the air that you breathe. You know, I was talking to Dr. Tom O'Brien, who was from the Institute for Functional Medicine, and he said he believes more than 60% of today's dementia and Alzheimer's is inhalation based, meaning that the air is so toxic in most of our big cities that it's causing early cognitive decline. First of all, we're living longer, right? We're living into our almost 80s now on average. But that extra time that we have, because we're not dying of viral infections and bacteria, we haven't learned how to maintain our health in those years that we now have as a gift. So we have the age, we have the chronology, but we don't have the health span. That's what we have to learn. How do I die skydiving and forgetting to open my parachute versus in a hospital bed, right? So going back to what we're talking about, this is what aging is the degradation of the cell, oxidizing of the DNA, that unraveling of the cell, which then you start to see outwardly, skin sags, hair turns white. It's a reflection of what's happening on the inside. And these toxic insults are what cause it. You were born with optimal cellular health, right? You were born in a certain condition. You have to do things to take years away. So it's your choices that change that. The GSTM family of genes will teach you what to prioritize. But the other thing we have to look at is also your SOD2 pathway, SOD2, which is antioxidation. So just as much as we take in toxins, you also make them. So every time you breathe, you are taking in oxygen, combining it with nutrition, putting it into the mitochondria of the cell to create energy, ATP as we call it. And in that process of using oxygen as fuel, you create a byproduct called an oxidant. And that oxidant, it's also a free radical. It's also toxic in nature. It's also inflammatory, also ages you. So in your SOD2 pathway, if you see a TT, then you know you're at minus 70% capacity in terms of efficiency of this process we just described. If you're a CT, you're about minus 40%. And if you're a CC, you're doing well. So that means the TTs and the CCs, you're not running on a treadmill 5 days a week. You're avoiding oxidative stress. What is oxidative stress? Taking in at a basic level too much oxygen, right? Over oxidizing yourself. Think of rust, right? When some metal gets rusty from oxygen exposure, you're doing that to your cells. Not getting proper nutrition. That also means under eating. So overeating and under eating, the proper caloric intake, oxidative stress. Improper sleep, that's another source of oxidative stress. Stress itself and hormone imbalances, these are all things that throw sort of a monkey wrench into your cellular processes and lead to oxidative stress. So you have to balance all these things to be able to thrive here. So what are we really saying? Mitochondrial function. Your mitochondria start to deplete at the age of 30, because again, our ancestors didn't live to 70. They usually, if you go way back when, 30, 35 was, you're about to expire. People didn't live into their 40s, right? We are now doing that. We're now living into our 80s. And if you want, 120, by the way, is what I personally believe is true human capacity. If you look at the actual physical structure of of the actual cells, it looks like they're designed to last about 120 years. So that can be a goal if you want to maintain that. So anyways, going back to it, your mitochondria start to deplete at the age of 30. If your SOD2 genes are off, then we're saying that this is more of a concern. That not only is the number depleting, the amount of mitochondria per cell, their size is also shrinking. And you're not inducing what we call mitophagy. So there's certain things you can do to stimulate new mitochondrial production. This is very important if your SOD2 is off. Even if your SOD2 isn't off, this is one of the fundamental paramounts to slowing aging down, maintaining mitochondrial health. So the DNA company has a product called Mitochondrial Optimizer. You may have seen it already, which is formulated to do exactly that. It stimulates the maintenance of the size and sort of virility of the mitochondria in your cells. The majority of your mitochondria, I shouldn't say the majority, the highest density of your mitochondria, number one is your heart, number two is your brain, and number three is your eyes. So when you start to see my vision is not what it used to be, that's a clear indication that you have not handled oxidative stress well. And this is why we'll see over and over again, we've worked in Canada here with an ophthalmology clinic on some research, and we saw it was very clear that people that are suffering from macular degeneration, MD, also had bad mitochondrial genetics because they were more prone, they had this propensity towards oxidation. And doctors know that the root cause of macular degeneration is oxidation. They say that, they know that, but they don't know what the root cause of oxidation is. So they don't treat the root, they treat the disease itself. So again, the first three things to go are heart, brain, and eyes. This is why cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer. By the time you reach the age of 70, you've lost 70% of your mitochondria if you aren't doing something proactively to maintain it, right? If you don't have exercises, protocols, whatever. So what are those things I mentioned? The mitochondrial optimizer. This is an area, by the way, and when we talk about hormones, I'm going to bring this up again. This is an area where if you do want to learn, how do I add 15 years to my life? I feel like if I look at my uncles and my mother and my aunts, this is about where I'm going to be. And I see cancer and I see Alzheimer's, I see certain things because of my ancestral history. How do I get past all that stuff? I want to be 120 riding my bicycle. How do I do that? This is exactly where I would highly, highly recommend anyone that has this sort of longitudinal goal to think about some of the coaching programs. It's really important to when you have a specific outcome in mind. My mom had breast cancer. I don't want it. Right? I have dementia in my family. I don't want to go there. I think that if I do things right, I can add another 20 years. That's work. It's not a simple, your gene says this, go do that. It's analyzing things in compound and looking at how systems interact with each other. Just like we talked about, your mood and behavior genes also affect your sleep. Genetics doesn't say that. That's our interpretation. So again, just an aside, this provoked the thought, which is, how do you slow down aging? This is an area where I would highly, highly, highly recommend you work with a coach, because they know so much. People in our team, so for example, Dr. Laura, I don't know if she's on here tonight or not, but there's a lot of brilliance to be shared if you want to achieve a specific goal. And it's like going through a one-time process to then have a tool that I can apply for the rest of my life. So just wanted to point that out when this topic came up. So what are the things you can do to support mitochondrial health? Well, it's deep breathing exercises, breath holding, in fact. If you were to work on truly in through the nose, hold it until it just starts to get uncomfortable, so you're not choking yourself, and let it out through the mouth. Do that twice a day. As simple as that seems, it stimulates mitophagy. Sauna, red light therapy. These are tools that stimulate mitophagy. This is why the data is showing that people that regularly use sauna, when I say regular, that means minimum 3 times a week, minus 40% Alzheimer's cases in those populations, right? Because of the mitophagy. It's not fighting Alzheimer's. We're saying you don't need to get Alzheimer's if you understand why Alzheimer's happens. So having brought that up, I'm going to talk to you about chronic disease and exactly what I just said. So you now understand there's certain detox pathways, right, that can either protect you against the threats that cause aging, cellular degradation, oxidative stress, oxidation to the DNA. There's certain internal processes that can determine to what efficiency do you deal with the oxidation and the internal threats that you create. Now, how does that equal disease? We talked about how it equals aging. It's very clear. If the cells are healthy and thriving, they're not aging, right? We have plenty of studies where twins, genetic twins, identical twins with 2 very different habits and 2 very different environments and 2 very different spouses and 2 very different diets have very different health outcomes. Genetics is the toolkit you've been given. Here's how my body is able to do each job. I now know which job is not working, and I have to prioritize that. The way I prioritize it is epigenetics, environment, nutrition, lifestyle, by removing certain things and adding certain things. And that's what gets you to this homeostatic middle of, I'm not aging anymore. And between the 2 twins, I'm the one that at 70 looks like I'm 50, and she's the one that at 70 looks like she's 80. Same genes, different habits. Right? But you have to first understand the genes to know what to prioritize, because you can't do everything. So how does this lead to disease? So we know the ApoE gene. I'm going to switch gears to a different section. I'm going to go to the cardiovascular section if you want to follow along. The ApoE gene is one of the most spoken of. I would say ApoE gene and BRCA are the most spoken of when it comes to genetics and this fear of dementia. In fact, if you're told that if you have the 3-4 version of ApoE, that you have an 8 to 10 times elevated risk of Alzheimer's and dementia versus the average person in this population. If you have the 4-4, it's a 17 to 20 times. So what's going on there? Why is it that we do have people then with the 4-4 that never get it? Right? So again, in an ancestral context, the people with the 3-4 and the 4-4, the very same people that we're saying today are not going to do well if they have the wrong habits. These are the people that survive the best, the people with the 3-4 and the 4, because in an ancestral context is king again, they didn't have chronic inflammatory insults. They had acute. They would go to battle once every few years. They get stabbed by a blade. And the person that had the ApoE 3-4 or 4-4 that was able to, deal with acute inflammation would survive. Now take that tool, that God-given gift of I can fight inflammation and come back from a blade through my gut, and pass that on to your children in 2023, who now everything they do is causing inflammation. It's a different context. And so you have to start again by, here's the disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever the disease may be. And we can say the same thing about, we can talk about the two at the same time. If you look at ApoE3, if you have a 3-3, great. If you have a 3-4 or a 4-4, there's a signal there that you need to prioritize this. 9p21, which is also in your cardiovascular section. If you have 0 to 2G, you're doing really well. If you have 3 to 4G, you're pretty much average, and your endothelium, here's your blood vessels, your arteries that are flowing all over your body, the inner lining, which is called the endothelium, which is what your blood actually touches, and the toxins that are flowing in with your blood get delivered and cause inflammation here. We can determine how resilient is this hardware. If you have the 4 to 6G, you're a sitting duck for inflammation. Again, doesn't mean disease. It just means that if you're making the wrong choices that are inflammatory in nature, this is going to fail. So now we've looked at these two things, ApoE and 9p21. If in either one of these buckets you see a red flag, you haven't been born with a problem, you don't have a disease, unless you cause it, right? Unless you cause it. And what would cause it? A source of inflammation. We already discussed what those are. So if ApoE3 means that I don't transport lipids, cholesterol efficiently, that's what it means. That my body, when it sends LDL and HDL, that process we know of, when it sends it out, it doesn't bring it back efficiently. And so it builds up. And what we think of dementia as is amyloid plaque. This plaque buildup in the brain that leads to cognitive decline, dysfunction, true dysfunction. And so we look at the symptom as the problem, the plaque itself. And so we associate the plaque gene, ApoE3, with the disease. And we only ever treat it from the disease down, as opposed to asking, why did the plaque go there? Oh, because my body uses cholesterol to fight inflammation. So the real question I have to ask is, why did I have inflammation in my brain? Why did I have inflammation in my arteries? And if you have the ApoE3, 3 or 3-4, or the 9p21, 3 to 6G, these are the things that are going to get inflamed and fail first, right? This is where you're going to see the plaque build up first. So the disease in the plaque is the problem. It's the inflammation, the cellular health. If the cells are never damaged, you can't get a chronic disease. It's really that simple. So what causes it? Airborne, inhalation-based, as Dr. Tam O'Brien said. Breathe things in that you're not supposed to. With the bad GSTP1 and with the bad GSTT1, you're going to cause inflammation. Gut-related, eating foods that are inflammatory in nature and having 0 GSTM1, which means the gut wall and lining eventually gets permeated, and it starts to seep toxins that are not yet gone through your digestive tract and broken down directly into the bloodstream, which then free flow up towards your brain, and they can cross the blood-brain barrier. Your blood-brain barrier was not designed to deal with those things. Again, assuming an ancestral context, it doesn't know those things are there. So these are two sources. Could be your hormones, which we're going to talk about soon. This is why these types of diseases, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular diseases, are so more prolific in terms of their outcome with women. We think of cardiovascular disease as a man's disease. We don't think of it as a woman's disease. Dementia, we know 80% of dementia cases are in women. That's clear. Why? Because women also have to deal with hormone toxicity. So now, why did I say that the problem is prolific for cardiovascular disease also in women, but we think of it as a man's disease? Because men live with cardiovascular disease, so we see it. Women die from cardiovascular disease, so we don't see it. That's why we think of cardiovascular disease as a man's disease, because all the cardiologists that are dealing with patients that are surviving and living with the disease, that are just managing it, are men. 66% of women will die on their first cardiovascular event without even knowing they were sick. No symptoms, no warning signs. Why? Because you have the cofactor of hormone toxicity, an additional layer of toxic insult causing inflammation quietly in the background that you may be completely outside of your awareness. This is a challenge. This is why most women that get breast cancer don't actually die of breast cancer. They die of cardiovascular disease during recovery from the cancer. That's actually what happens, because both the toxicity is causing both of these things. And if you're getting breast cancer, your heart is probably already suffering, right? So, not to get into some, deep bad news, everything I just said is very positive. Why? Because if you know why it happens, you no longer have to wait to treat it. And if you already have it, you no longer need to just manage it. You can prevent and you can reverse. And this is why I pointed out that if anyone has elevated concerns in these areas, very, very important for you to work on a coaching program. It's a difference between, I mean, even in this, 15 minutes that we spent together, I'm sure there's things you heard that weren't spelled out in the report, just because we're not allowed to. When FDA, Health Canada, there's restrictions on what can be handed over directly to a consumer, and rightfully so, because nobody should be running out doing their own healthcare regimen without guidance, because there's things you just don't know. And so in these programs, we're able to then offer you that sort of concentrated, personalized guidance to be able to work on whether it's disease prevention, aging prevention, disease reversal if you already have a problem, because it does take work. It's not like taking a pill. It's more like 3-4 months of behavioral change and habit adoption to truly reverse. It takes time, but it's permanent, and you're addressing the root cause. It's not my mom had Alzheimer's, what supplement do I take? It's like, let's find your why. What's your hole in your boat that the water is leaking in from? What do we actually need to plug versus the one size fits all answer, right? So just keep that in mind. So as we look at, chronic disease and aging, it becomes clear that if these things are rooted in inflammation, and if we start to understand why we suffer from inflammation, what are the inputs and what are the external outputs, or say internal outputs, that create this state in us, we now know why chronic disease can settle in. Which disease is just a Russian roulette of which hardware is not deficient. I have bad endothelial hardware. I have bad ApoE. I have bad hormones, so it's also causing, breast and ovarian health issues. So which disease is that? We can start to piece those pieces together, and you can start to predict what may come, so you know what to deal with. So how do you deal with this? It's obviously the habits. It's, unwinding and unraveling the habits that are burdensome to your genome, the things that you were not designed for. But it's also adding supplementation, food, exercises, the right habits that support and replace the biological function that just isn't there at an efficient level, right? So if you're missing the GSTT1 gene, don't have it, then we know you don't run out and go get some glutathione, which seems to be the intuitive answer. My naturopath told me to take some glutathione because it looks like there's toxins in my blood. Well, GSTT1 is the genetic instruction telling glutathione what to do. So if it's missing, you've just taken something for which you have no instruction, and it starts to bind onto minerals and nutrients and things you actually need, and then you start to feel sick. So the prescription around what to actually do is also personalized, right? And if you do find that you have bad detox genes, and what I was just saying is, what do you add? You're adding more of the precursors. NAC, which is N-acetylcysteine, selenium, ALA, which is alpha lipoic acid, milk thistle. If you combine NAC with glycine, very potent. Things like methylene blue. There's plenty. If you go to any biohacker or naturopath type blog or website, you'll find, answers, or again, our coaches can help you with answers there. But there's a lot you can do to detoxify. Now, we're going to layer onto this story some of the cofactors, and I'll just quickly touch on this because I want to make sure we have time for hormones. Nitric oxide is one of the most important contributors to longitudinal health or longitudinal disease. And your NOS3 gene determines your ability to create nitric oxide receptors and actually experience that, right? So your NOS3 gene, if it's optimal GG, you're doing great. If it's TT, you have to be supplementing with nitric oxide. It's a difference between cardiovascular disease or not. It's a difference between 5 to 7 years of brain health. It's highly impactful because we're talking about blood flow and nutrient delivery. You can eat the food, but is it getting to your cells? Right? You can go on a purely organic diet, but if you have poor blood flow and poor dilation, which is the ACE gene, then all of a sudden you're not getting it there. You're not getting it to the cell. So important to look at your NOS3 gene. We do have a recommendation on nitric oxide supplements that we like. I don't know if anyone on our team has a link to that, but there's a couple brands that we think are really good. A lot of them don't work so well, but there's a couple that really stand out. So now we're going to look at methylation quickly, and then we're going to jump to your hormones. Then we're going to get to your questions. So methylation is in the same section. It's in cardiovascular. It's also in your immunity and inflammation section. And what is methylation? This complicated word, it's always this gray area of like, sounds interesting, but I got no clue what you're talking about, right? So methylation is three things. In a nutshell, anti-inflammatory response. All of what we talked about is how do I get inflammation? Then we talked about what will that inflammation trigger in terms of disease and aging. And you can start to now think the way that I've been speaking and apply it to any disease, right? Well, if I know I have inflammation and I know it could lead to a disease, okay, I'm going to work on removing the insults that cause it. But doesn't my body fight inflammation? Yes, that's methylation. So how do I know how efficiently I do that? So the second two things, I'm going to tell you the efficiency and what to change, but just so you understand the second two things, methylation is also taking a non-water soluble toxin, sending a methyl group to it and making it water soluble so you can pee it out. So it's another phase of detoxification. There's phase 1, phase 2. It helps you. It's another tool that your body uses to detoxify certain toxins that are not water soluble. The third thing, and this is really important, and this is more esoteric in nature, but you'll be able to apply this if you understand this. Methylation is also the management of your gene expression. So picture again the cave person running on a field, or say walking on a field, and all of a sudden they're being chased by a tiger. What do they need? They need adrenaline, they need testosterone, they need their muscle fibers twitching hard, they need that energy being sent from the ATP and the mitochondria into their bloodstream. Like they need everything on full throttle. So what is genetic expression? Is your genes up or down regulating their expression to give you exactly what you need for the current input? If someone's yelling at you, if someone is making you laugh, if you're eating a food, what exactly needs to be turned on and off to be in the best state for that thing that's happening? We have these baseline genes. You know what your genes are, right? Now, based on what you eat, based on what you feel, based on the level of chemicals in your environment, your expression of those genes will change up and down. And when we talk about hormones, this is why hormone disruption is so important, because you could have beautiful hormones, but if all your habits are wrong, you're changing their expression to cause yourself illness. So this is why methylation is important, because as you're doing what you're trying to do, the efficiency by which your body is able to deal with all the inputs, take some supplements, eat some food, meditate, and reduce stress. How quickly or slowly does your body actually make those changes? That's your methylation. So in this cascade, I'm going to point out a couple of things. MTHFR is a gene that everybody looks at, right? And we speak of it as the methylation gene, but when you look at it more functionally in a pathway, this is another thing that the DNA company does very differently. As opposed to looking at a single gene and a single meaning, we've understood that the body doesn't work like that. The body has systems. There's baton passes. When I methylate, it's one gene doing its job and then passing the baton, and then it's a relay race, right? And if there's one link in that chain that's broken, the whole chain gets affected. So you can't singularly look at a single gene and make a call. You have to look at the whole pathway and system. So MTHFR, yes, is a starring character. And if your MTHFR is off, then you're probably not going to do so well with folic acid. The natural form that we need is folate. Folate used to be in our food. It was stripped away because a lot of the grains, etc., have lost their husk and their fibers, which is where the folate was. And this affects your hair, your skin. It affects everything. And so the FDA has pushed for folic acid to be brought into food. Now, the challenge is folate gets to work. Folic acid needs genetic instruction. And if you have a bad MTHFR, then you're not instructing it well. And in fact, if you have the worst MTHFR, you're at minus 70% capacity because just everything feels off. This overarching inflammation, constant, I don't feel good, because all systems fail when methylation is down. So you have to look at that to understand if folic acid is a problem for you and you need folate. Then SHMT1 is a secondary character to that. And if you have the AA version versus the GA, then you may want to consider taking some folinic acid. The folinic acid may be better suited for your genes and cause you to feel amazing all of a sudden. That this overarching brain fog and malaise and things that you feel just sort of go away and disappear if you take exactly what you need. Then we look at MTR and MTRR. These are genes that tell you what version of B12 you should take, which is so important for longitudinal staving off of inflammation. B12 is one of the key micronutrients that you need for that. And our diets don't deliver as much as they used to. So you probably should be supplementing. It's one of those key things like vitamin D, everybody needs to take. Vitamin C is a potent antioxidant everybody should take. Now, all of a sudden, if your B12 metabolic pathway is broken, MTR, MTRR are off, then your typical methylcobalamin, which is usually what you buy from a store, methylcobalamin, won't work that well for you. You need what's called adenosyl, starts with the A, adenosyl. And then all of a sudden you'll start to feel better, right? FUT2, FUT2 speaks to, did my ancestors eat beef? Which means that I have a good genetic ability to metabolize B12 in my gut. So if I swallow a pill or if I eat some beef, I'm getting that B12. If my FUT2 is off and I'm not doing so well there, well, then I maybe need to take it sublingually under your tongue because I have the bad genetic instruction. My ancestors ate more goat and sheep and perhaps no red meat at all, right? So those three key areas will really instruct your B vitamins and your folate, folinic acid, folic acid, all of those considerations. And these are overarching implications. So it's not like I'm saying this is a cardiovascular gene, this is a dopamine gene, this is a everything cascade. Your methylation being off, everything is off. Methylation being on, everything gets better. It's a core fundamental process that you want to be at its optimal, to have less inflammation, to have more methyl groups efficiently taking toxins and making them water soluble, but most importantly, having efficient gene expression so your body is constantly responding as it should be for the given incoming stimulus, whatever that is, whether it's food, sound, shock, anything, right? So with that, we're going to jump to hormones. And hormones, we have to look at in the context of biological male, biological female. What cascade set were you born with? And this is very important because unless you're taking medication to change this, and in fact, this could even inform what medication somebody should take, or if you're on a hormone treatment, etc., there could be a big change in, you may not be looking for what can cause the big changes, what the implications are, right? You may be looking at the wrong implications. So in the context of a biological male or biological female, the outcomes range from, in a biological male, we're looking at hair, we're looking at skin, we're looking at libido, we're looking at prostate health, and we're looking at muscle retention and overall, fitness planning. In women, we're looking at all of that minus prostate health, but we're also looking at fibromyalgia, endometriosis, infertility, puberty, fertility age, which we just said, menopause. Those are the three phases: puberty, fertility, menopause, right? Then you're, post-menopause as you get into a more senior age. We're looking at menstrual cycle, PMS. Like there's all these considerations that for women, the hormones mean so much more. The outcomes are so much more, right? And in today's context, where the plastics, the chemicals, the pesticides in your lawn, the birth control pills, the Teflon coated frying pan, all of these hormone mimicking disruptors that enter your body and your body treats them as more estrogen can exaggerate some of the estrogen related problems. And this is why it's more important today than ever before. This is why there's so much more anxiety. This is why, infertility issues are so much more prolific. The combination of the genetics designed for a very different historical reality with today's epigenetic inputs, which are not what we're designed for. So what you need to look for is step one, how does your CYP17A1 convert your progesterones into testosterones? And for women, you want that to be slow, the lowest possible. For men, you don't mind having a little bit more because the testosterone gives you that sort of manly physique and chiseling that you want, right? So for women, you want it to be slow. For men, it's okay for it to be a little faster. From there, you then see there's the androgen clearance or conversion into DHT. So SRD5A2 will tell you how efficiently you convert your testosterone into DHT. And before looking at what that means, we also have to look at the UGTB genes, UGTB17 and 5. They will tell you how efficiently you clear DHT and remove it. DHT is manly man super testosterone. So the people that have every lip ripped striated muscle fiber showing, it's actually difficult for them to put on fat. Whether they exercise or not, they have a six-pack. Think about an NBA player, that long, wiry, fibrous muscle. That's DHT, right? Too much of it is where you see prostate issues. Too much of it means fast conversion and low clearance, the UGTB1 genes, right? For women, it means hair loss. It means cystic acne. It means polycystic ovarian cyst, right? So polycystic ovarian syndrome. It means potentially infertility issues, right? And so the problems in the cascade, we have to look at three buckets to understand who you are. We were just looking at what we call hormone dominance. So am I estrogen dominant? Am I androgen dominant? Or am I co-dominant? So estrogen dominant means, in the easiest way, the crudest example I can give you is, here's Kim Kardashian, here's Kendall Jenner. Kim Kardashian is curvy, voluptuous. Kendall Jenner, her sister, is a slim runway model. Very different physical appearance. They have the same mother, different father, so the genetics are different. One is more estrogenized, one is more androgenized. That's the outcome. So the benefits and problems of the two are different. The estrogen dominant women is probably better skin, better hair, easier to have pregnancy. She has that voluptuous figure she wants, but it may be harder to burn fat. She may get endometriosis. She may get fibromyalgia. Menopause is probably going to be rocky. She may have bigger mood swings. The androgenized woman, it's like, well, I have this runway model figure, but I can't get the curves I want. And this acne always keeps coming back and killing me. My hair is horrible. And, I have fertility issues, like we said, but all these menstrual pains and cramps and mood swings and everything one talks about, I don't have that. Appearance of a tomboy, right? Where does that come from? It comes from a much more muted menstrual cycle, which doesn't have that, hormonal, the peaks and valleys of the circadian rhythm of the hormone cycle, because the hormones are lower to begin with. So the problems and benefits are different. Again, there's a superpower and there's a kryptonite depending what you're wanting from this tool. So that's dominance. Second layer is toxicity. If a woman is estrogen dominant and she's also estrogen toxic, meaning the CYP1B1 gene or CYP3A4 gene is suboptimal, then all of a sudden the CYP1B1 is causing you to make what we call 4-hydroxyestrogen, and the CYP3A4 is causing you to make 16-hydroxyestrogen, very, very potent toxin. For CYP1B1, if you see a CG or a GG, red flag. Women, look at this, park that for a second. CYP1B1, CYP1B1. If you see a CG or a GG, red flag, let's park that. CYP3A4, if you see an AG or a GG, park that, big red flag. Now, what this means, if you are estrogen dominant and you are estrogen toxic, you have one of these versions we just said from the CYP1B1 or 3A4, then not only are you making too much of the fuel, but it's a very fireous fuel, meaning it's toxic in nature. And if you then, step 3 of 3, do not have the right detox pathways, same detox pathways, glutathione, antioxidation, COMT. Remember COMT, that protein we said clears your neurochemicals? It also clears your hormones. So the fast COMT may mean you have more addictive reward-seeking behavior, but it also means you clear your hormones quickly, so you don't necessarily feel what we call bad menstrual cycle, fibromyalgia, all these types of things, right? So this part's very important, particularly for women. Now, it's not that it doesn't matter for men. We've seen many men that have the CYP3A4, 16-hydroxyestrogen pronounced, getting testicular cancer, right? It's a potent cause of testicular cancer because of the very specific place where the inflammation is caused. For the women, we're talking about breast cancer, ovarian cancer. So it goes back to that myth around BRCA. The BRCA gene, there's a reason why we don't test for it, even though everyone else does, is because it doesn't cause cancer. It's a tumor suppressor. So all it tells us is how efficiently you repair cancer and get rid of it and repair damaged DNA and oxidized cells. It's a repair tool. So if you, God forbid, got breast cancer, it's an indication for how quickly you're going to heal. But there's nowhere in that do we understand why you got cancer to begin with. That is answered by looking at, well, I'm estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic. I had the wrong detox pathways, and I took the birth control pill for 15 years, and I have a Teflon coated frying pan, and I sleep on a toxic mattress. So I'm adding all these hormone disruptors, the epigenetics, again, remember, that are overloading that pathway, right? And that's what equals the level of inflammation, which then makes you sick. So that's how to look at hormones: dominance, quality, which is toxicity, and then clearance. And you start to pick apart, where's my red flag? And then you know where to intervene. So many women, as they age, think about going on to hormone replacement therapy. The same thing as men. So many men think about going on to hormone replacement therapy. And what do you actually take? Where do you intervene? I can't tell you how many women that we've seen that are taking estradiol, for example, a very specific place to intervene in the cascade of hormones. And then we have to show them that CYP1B1 converts estradiol into 4-hydroxyestrogen. So they're fueling cancer, they're fueling dementia, they're fueling cardiovascular disease. There's this temporary blessing of, oh, my estrogens are back, I feel good. But the inflammation, that silent killer in the background, is being pronounced in a significant way. So this is, and I had mentioned earlier that there's 2 parts to this journey that I would really highly recommend you talk to someone on our team about coaching. One was when we talked about aging and disease in general, right? So chronic disease and aging, that this complex thing to navigate, which is our aging, where to intervene, how to intervene, the habits you need to develop, what actually is a threat. It's mostly outside of our awareness. So this is where our coach can be very, very helpful. The other area is this: hormones. Any woman who believes that menopause might be an issue, that she wants to get on hormone replacement therapy, that has suffered from endometriosis, fibromyalgia, that has crazy mood swings, this is an area where I'd highly recommend that you work with a coach, because the cascade is so complex. It's not this gene means this, good luck, right? It's not this gene means take some B12 like we talked about with methylation. It's not that simple and straightforward. It's a complex cascade. It requires experience. Every time we look at it, we learn something new. That's how complex it is. Whenever we work with a patient, we always learn something new, because the nuances of your habits and what you surround yourself by and the people you deal with and the food you eat is all unique. And so that's just another area I would point out that I would recommend that you talk to somebody about coaching if you feel like this is a priority and it's an area that sticks out for you. So the only area we didn't touch on was diet and nutrition. But before we go there, I thought I should open the floor to questions, because I know that time is running out and I want to make sure that we get your precise answers. And I know diet and nutrition is an area where it's very straightforward. So I can give you some, additional insights that perhaps aren't there. We'll see how much time we end up spending on questions. But I'll leave that to prioritize questions, because I believe that's more important for you. Also, because diet and nutrition is a very straightforward, easy place to understand, how do you metabolize fats and etc. So with that, let's open it to the floor. There is a Q&A box. Let's see where it is. There should be a Q&A box here. Oh, no Q&A. Oh, sorry. So you can put it, oh, I'm getting a no Q&A.
You can put it in the
The
chat.
chat. So let's put it in the chat box. And if you don't mind, let's start with a question each, just because there's everybody here, and the more time we have, the more we'll keep going it up to you, opening it up to you. So just go ahead and type it in the chat box. And if anyone is having a challenge typing it in the chat box, if it's not working, just raise your hand on camera, or you can even click on raising your hand, just so we can call and support you directly.
We're trying to get it enabled right now, sir.
Okay, sure, okay. The one nuance I'll point out about diet nutrition while we're looking at this is everything we said about mood and behavior is the first place to start when it comes to diet nutrition. Because the question we usually ask is, what should I eat? Right? And there's answers out there. There's plenty of books. There's many Mark Hymans out there that are telling you what to eat. The question we don't ask is, how do I eat? What does my plate look like? How do I know, my metabolic health? What causes me to overeat? Those things are driven by your mood and behavior genes. Do you have more addictive tendencies where you're not getting satisfied, and so you're constantly seeking food as a source of pleasure? Do you have more binging tendencies where that when you open the ice cream, it's not so much about I need a scoop, it's like I can't finish until the bucket's empty, right? Or is it more like I'm serotonin dysregulated? This is a very irritable planet to be living on. And as a coping mechanism, my body pushes me towards food because it wants to be happy. It doesn't want to be in a cortisol state, an elevated cortisol state. So there's nuances in the mood and behavior section that I would then apply. I would recommend you apply to thinking around how you perceive food. The MC4R gene will point out satiety of the palate. There's some people that finish their meal and then need to graze at the pantry. They then need to go to the pot to scrape the bottom. They then need their Doritos and they need their cookies. Whatever was in their meal wasn't good enough. This is actually a survival mechanism from our ancestors who actually fared better because they would seek out variety. The only way to get the satisfaction for someone who's MC4R deficient, which is in your diet report, is to get multiple flavors and textures. So it was actually, again, just like ApoE, the inflammatory response was beneficial in an old context, is damaging in today's context. This was beneficial in old context, whereas nutrition was scarce. So you are wired to seek out variety and get what you need. But today, where your fridge is fully stocked and your pantry is full of everything you can imagine, it's a big problem. FTO, the FTO gene signals satiety of the gut. So the signal from the gut to the brain and how efficiently do you deliver that signal, so how long does it take, is driven by the FTO gene. So if you're suboptimal for FTO, then you need to plate your food and you need to look at it visually to understand, I know what caloric intake I'm aiming for, but for some reason I never get there. It's something else. It's a much bigger number. Well, then it's visually plating your food and understanding that you maybe need a glass of water or milk or something because you need that signal to start earlier, right? It takes longer. It's a delayed signal. Okay, now we got a couple questions in here. So Corey's asking, vitamin D, I was wondering if I can make it well from sunshine, not too clear. Okay, so when you're looking at your vitamin D profile, there's 3 genes we're looking at. And I'm gonna actually open them up here. So we're looking at, actually, I'm gonna go back to a different section. 1 second. Just because I want to give you precisely where to intervene. When it comes to vitamin D, there's how much and how often. Those are 2 very different questions to answer because the right vitamin D protocol isn't the same for everybody. It's nowhere near the same answer for everybody. And there's 3 genes you need to look at. So I'm going to open them up here so I can be precise about what we're doing. So you're looking at the, 1 sec. I want to read it to you the same way that you see it in your report. Okay, so CYP 2R1. In your report, you'll see AA, AG, or GG. So this speaks to your ability to take vitamin D from the sun, metabolize it. Oh, sorry, I got this backwards. Level. So sorry, GC. Let's start with GC. So the GC gene speaks to your body's ability to take vitamin D2 and convert it to D3, right? So that's your question, Corey, about sun. So if you do this efficiently, where you have the CC version, then the sun may be enough for you, 15 to 20 minutes in the morning, right? If you don't do this efficiently, then you probably, even if you're in the sun, still need to supplement, right? Now, the second layer to this is the CYP2R1 gene, which determines how efficiently do I transport that D3 that is made to the cell. So now it's in the blood, and if I go measure my blood, I'm going to see appropriate vitamin D levels. But if it's not in the cell, it's no benefit to me. And by the way, the vitamin D is the only cascade that's this complicated because, again, contextually, our ancestors got too much. They were out in the sun all day. So they were wired to store and mitigate utilization. Now we are indoors all day and we are wired for vitamin D genetics of someone that got too much and we're not getting enough. So GC will tell you how much to take or whether to take it if you're also getting the sun. CYP2R1 will tell you how often. So if you have the AG or even worse GG, then one dose is not enough because you don't transport it efficiently to the cells. It doesn't get there in time, may end up being stored in fat. Then the VDP gene or VDR gene, the VDR gene, which determines the receptor and how efficiently you actually bind once it's delivered by the GC gene to the cell. If you have the CC gene, you're doing that job of binding very efficiently. If the TT, you don't do it so well. And you have to think about perhaps increasing the dose and the frequency. The only thing I would say is do not go past, say, 3 p.m. with your vitamin D, because it then starts to affect your circadian rhythm and clock, because your body doesn't know that you're getting into evening. It's confused. The vitamin D is signaling morning, right? The best times to get sun exposure are, I would say, before 10 a.m. and 4 to 6 p.m. These are the two times where the sun gives you the healthiest nutrition, meaning you're getting all the nutrient value without the UV and toxic rays that causes cellular damage. It's in the morning, sunrise to like 10 a.m. and then 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Those are the two times where if you get sun exposure, that it's the best quality sun, right? It's a tiny fraction of the UV, and the red light and other therapeutic rays, there's red, green, blue light that comes from sun. They're more intense during those times. We're meant to get sun during that time. So that also make a difference. If you're getting midday sun versus morning or evening sun, you also aren't getting enough vitamin D, right? Same another part to that. So nitric oxide, a couple people have asked. So I'm going to answer for both of you, Linda and Terry, which nitric oxide to get. But I'm first going to answer Terry's question about, what to do about the mouth taping, etc. So yes, so one of the highest density of the NOS3 gene in your body is actually in the nasal cavity. So nose breathing actually activates nitric oxide receptors in your body. And breathing through your mouth eliminates that job. So all of a sudden you're not activating these nitric oxide receptors. And this is why meditation and deep breathing and even just 2 minutes of that 3 times a day is therapeutic. It seems insignificant. It is highly significant. It will change your heart health. It will change your brain. It will change nutrient delivery to the cell because you're activating nitric oxide receptors. So keep in mind that this activation from the receptors, or the gene expression, I should say, sorry, in your nose, activates the receptor. So yes, mouth taping. This is why mouth taping works, because it forces you to breathe through your nose while you're sleeping. Breathing exercises, yes, as long as you're focusing on inhalation through the nose and exhaling through the mouth, then you're going to get that nitric oxide uptick, right? So definitely helps. Now, which one to get? I always forget their website. I'm going to look it up right now. I believe it's called NO1. Let me just tell you. The guy's name is Nathan Bryan. He's a brilliant scientists who formulated it, and I actually use it myself. We're not affiliated with them in any way. I just believe that this product really works. And there's also a product called Cardio Miracle. So now it depends what you're looking for, and I'll explain that right now. So if you go to, in fact, I'll just drop it in the chat. Let's see. If you go to Cardio Miracle, you'll find a product that doesn't specifically speak to nitric oxide delivery, but that's what it does. It's an amazing cocktail, and I believe we maybe even have a discount code for you. If we do, we'll share it. Oh, they're both in here. Somebody dropped, B dropped them both in. So Cardio Miracle is more of a general cocktail that, yes, supports nitric oxide health, but also supports a lot of other things. So overall overarching health, good for cardiovascular, good for a lot of things. N101 is specific for nitric oxide, which then as a byproduct ends up supporting all these other things, but it's not formulated to support those things. It's supported to give you more nitric oxide. Cardio Miracle is formulated to support a lot of things. We might even have a promo code for you for Cardio Miracle. We'll check. If we do, we'll share it. So just so you guys know. So those are two products that you can use for that. I've used both of them. I think they're great. So Dan is asking, what does it mean if a woman is androgen dominant report but only has one of the 6 androgen characteristics? So it means, so there's many reasons why this could be happening. What all we're saying is that if we were to take your hormone metabolism and measure in a cup at the end of the month what you made, there's going to be more testosterone than the average population. This is not necessarily a bad thing. It can actually be a great thing. It's great for longitudinal health. If you look at a centenarian, an elderly person, they're usually, especially when it comes to men, a little more wiry, thinner frame, you know. It's not only because of the eat, but their hormone structure is driving that. So high testosterone levels are a great marker for longevity. In fact, for men, I would say it's the #1 marker for how long you're going to live, high testosterone levels. So for women, similar thing, but if you're making DHT, toxic testosterone, it can have other outcomes that you don't necessarily want. You don't want to look like this, right? You want to maintain that beautiful mane that you may have that makes me jealous, but you there's other outcomes that you don't want. So anyway, so without looking at a report, I can't specifically call out and tell you why that call was made, but I can say what it means is that your net result is more testosterone than the average person, right? It can be a good thing, it can be a problematic thing, depending again on context, but depending what you surround yourself by, depending what your goals are. If you're trying to, you know, have an Instagram booty, right, which so many women are today, it might be challenging because you're not wired for that hormonally. But if you're trying to be a runway model, you're probably already there, right? So that's, so again, it depends on what you're trying to achieve with it. So how can you have estrogen toxicity if you have a balanced hormone profile? So estrogen toxicity may be elevated, but if you don't have estrogen dominance, we're saying you make a toxic version, but you don't make much of it. You may also have good detox pathways. And this is exactly why I said that when it comes to hormones, this is one of the places where I highly recommend working with a coach, especially for women, because it is so impactful in your long-term health. And because the cascade is complex, and because we cannot look at it gene by gene, it's not enough of an answer. You have to look at the cascade. We have to consider your environment, your lifestyle, your nutrition. The DNA is half the story. What are you doing with the tools you've been given? Right? If here's your genetic legacy, the cards you've been dealt, if we don't know your habits, we really don't know what to tell you. Right? And so then what numbers estrogen dominance? A CYP19A1, 19A1. That's the gene that converts your testosterone into estrogen. But CYP17A1 converts your progesterone into estrogen or into testosterone. So even that being fast and having a slow or median CYP17 19A1 can also mean estrogen dominance because you have too much fuel. So even though you're making a lot of estrogen seemingly by your genomics, the fuel is burdensome, and so it's pushing through and creating more estrogen. This is, again, goes back to exactly what I said. It's a complicated cascade. Nobody's expecting you to understand it in a single call like this. In fact, our training modules that clinicians take, the hormone document is as big as all the other ones combined, right? So we're talking about it surface level today. There's so much more that we know. There's limited time here, so we're trying to give you as much value as possible. There's so much more that we know, but the hormone area is the biggest and most complex. It's also the least studied when it comes to genetics. Most genetic tests and programs don't actually inform hormones and tell you, because they're so complicated, because singular gene interpretation doesn't tell you anything. If you haven't done the clinical work of working on patients and interpreting the cascade, there really isn't much to tell you other than you make too much estrogen. What does that mean? It could mean something good, it could mean something bad, depending on what problem you're trying to solve, right? So I hope that answered your direct question of what number is estrogen dominance. It's CYP19A1, and as a cofactor, it's also CYP17A1 in terms of how much testosterone you make, which then is the fuel for estrogen, because your testosterone gets converted into estrogen. So far we've been through your questions. Any other questions, guys? We want to make sure we give you ample time. I know that this was booked till 7:30, but I want to make sure that and I don't know what time zone you're in, but I want to make sure we give you enough time. So if there's another couple questions, let's go for it while we're here. Otherwise, if everyone is satisfied, we can give you your evening back, but I want to make sure that you don't leave here with open questions. Let's get them answered for you. So any other thoughts? And maybe we'll share again with you. It was earlier on in the chat, how to speak to someone on our end about coaching, especially if it's about hormones. Any woman here that's considering taking BHRT, do not do it until you've had a genetic coach. It's a choice between, I want to feel amazing in my old age versus I cause breast cancer. And I'm saying this with confidence because there's patients that we've dealt with, that I've personally dealt with, where we identified their cause of their breast cancer was the day they went on hormone therapy. Not because hormone therapy causes cancer, but their unique cascade was not aligned with the specific product and specific dose they took. Right. So that's a very important area where I think women should consider this. There's a couple more questions. Would like to know if we will get the recording of today's webinar. I don't know the answer to that. B, if you don't mind, I believe everybody will get the recording, but B, if you don't mind just answering that question.
Yeah, we'll be sending out a recording of today's session along with any of the codes that Kash has mentioned and any contact information for our programs.
Good. Linda, to answer your question, is CYP19 CT good or bad? So this means you're somewhat middle. So now look at your CYP17A1, because if that's also middle or fast, then you're truly dominant. So again, it's not a singular standalone answer when it comes to hormones. You have to look at the full cascade. CYP19A1 is somewhat fast. Your now we have to look at, well, is there estrogen toxicity? How efficient are the detox pathways, right? So this is where, again, singular gene calls are hard to answer. But sorry, you're saying that your I just saw this note here. So your CYP17A1 is the AA. 1 second, I'm just opening this up because I'm looking at it as raw data. Just want to convert it to what you see. Oh, sorry, I'm not even in the hormone section anymore. We just go there for a second. So I want to talk to you about all of the genes, not just the ones you're asking about, because this is so important when it comes to women's health. So you talked about CYP19A1, and you said you're the CT, which means that you're mid in terms of metabolizing estrogens. Your CYP17A1 is AA, which is low, which is the right place a woman wants to be. That's good. That's where women want to be. Then you're going to look at your CYP 1B1 and 3A4 to see if there's a G in there anywhere. If there's a G in there, then all of a sudden there's another problem, which is the estrogen that you're somewhat overproducing, somewhat, not significant, but somewhat. If there's also estrogen toxicity, then all of a sudden it becomes a red flag. Then you're going to look at your detox pathways. If those are off and there's estrogen toxicity, that red flag becomes a priority because you're making a little bit too much estrogen on its own, not a big deal. So CYP1B1 is GG. So there you go. That's a prime example of your CYP19 is mid. Okay, you're kind of in the middle ground, a little bit too much estrogen, but not big deal yet. Oh, you're converting it into 4-hydroxyestrogen through the CYP1B1 pathway with a GG fast gene. Now all of a sudden it goes in the priority lane. Now all of a sudden we're talking about how do I prevent breast cancer? How do I prevent cardiovascular disease? How do I prevent Alzheimer's? How do I not have a crazy roller coaster menopause? Depending on your age, the application of this information is different. If you're 25 years old, there's very different problems we're trying to solve than if you're 45 years old, right? But along the way, as you age, there's going to be ongoing problems to solve. So you're 60. So now we're looking at bone health. We're looking at heavy metal toxicity. We're looking at cognitive decline and dementia. We're looking at cardiovascular health, right? So if your CYP1B1 is toxic as it is, these are some of the concerns. All of a sudden, cognitive decline is settling in. My brain is just not what it used to be. Like, what happened? And that's kind of what happened. And that's why we believe diseases happen because of the way they happen. The thing that you feel on the day you get sick started 20 years prior to. Your body was just fighting it. Your body was managing inflammation versus illness, and then all of a sudden, inflammation wins and disease kicks in, right? So it's that, well, I feel okay, yeah, because your body's still probably keeping it at bay. There's something you're doing right. But CYP1B1 GG is an extreme. That's an exact place where I would recommend talking to someone, working with somebody as a coach, because it's implicated in so many problems, especially for a woman, right? So what we did right now is the investigative work of figuring out what's your priority, right? This is a big priority for you, big priority. And any woman that's been through any of the female health problems, that commonly happen, knowing what they could have known that you now have the ability to know, it's like, I wish I knew that, right? Why did I have to go through chemo and all this kind of stuff? Like, I wish I knew. We deal with this all the time. Okay. So if there aren't any more questions, we can, is there, sorry, I'm sorry guys, I actually missed a couple of questions here. There's something about zinc. Sorry, I missed your question because it came underneath another question. So as opposed to a new question, it somehow got connected to the other one. So red flag and zinc, maybe I do not use it optimally. No, it means that you need to take more. So red flag and zinc is not about how much is in your blood. It's about how much you need to take. And zinc is one of those things that you have to have enough. We're talking about cancer prevention, inflammation prevention, mood. Like, it's another one of those things that just deals with everything. So if you have the worst version, you should be taking, I think it's 14 or 15 milligrams a day. And if you're in the middle, it's 10. And if you have the best version, you should still be taking 5 because we don't get enough from our food, right? So it's more a question of dosage. What connection does it have to the microbiome? So gut lining, inflammation, right? So if you're not getting enough zinc, then the damage you're causing that may be hurting your gut microbiome is going to be exaggerated. So the protective mechanisms are not there, right? So zinc is one of those things that supports you in terms, yes, and Leslie's saying I have all of the above, right? So yeah, because the genome speaks to it. So again, our food does not deliver what it's meant to deliver. It's very hard. Even if you pick the best of the best, the soil is depleted, right? So you have to be supporting with minerals, and zinc and copper are probably the two most important. Those are the minerals that we need that we're completely void of. So sorry, Maya has a question. I'm just going to take a look. So I don't know how to use Zoom. So when you have, so this is an area where we're no longer talking about chronic disease, we're talking about genetic condition, right? So when it comes to genetic condition, it's more like there's an innate problem, right? There's something that's there. Now, to what degree does it express is based on the health of the terrain. There's some people, for example, that have Lyme disease. They don't even know they have it. There's some people that have Lyme disease that can't get out of bed for 6 months. It's the exact same bacteria in the same species in a human. Why the highly variable outcome? It's the terrain. So same thing I would say about autonomic dysfunction. Okay, you've been diagnosed with something, you're working on it. Now, to what degree is it a burden in your life? Depends on how healthy your body is. Innate cellular health, those detox pathways we were talking about, antioxidant pathways. So doing all the things to support your mitochondria, supporting detox, supporting hormones, supporting stressors and burnout, understanding your neural map, your executive function, right? All of those functional tools and functional pathways being at their best means that this problem you're suffering from starts to get muted, right? You feel a lighter version of the same thing because the terrain is handling it so well. This is why 30-year-olds don't get dementia because their mitochondria are still firing strong, their cells are still healthy, the hormone levels are still high. And so they're fighting that thing that once they get to 50, hormone levels drop, mitochondria depletes, the cell is degraded and oxidized. So all of a sudden disease can now settle in, right? Same thing with you. I have this thing. How bad does it feel? Depends on how healthy I am. My genes are telling me exactly what my threats are and what to focus on to have the best terrain, right? All right, guys. It looks like we've been through all the questions. So any other thoughts, or we'll let you get back to your clean diets and exercise and evening sleep hygiene routines. Start putting your blue light filter lenses on. Start seeing that amber glow. Start dimming the lights, right? Turn those pot lights down. If you have a fireplace, turn it on and take a look at it for a second to bind that melatonin, right? Whatever stressors you have, write it down in a notebook, put it away and park it so that your brain is ready to receive rest. Do some deep breathing, do some stretching, some yoga if you can, you know. How do I speed up my body converting testosterone into DHT? It's an SRD5A2 gene. Very few people ask that question because it's toxic in nature. So most people don't want that, right? There are supplements that can do that. We make something called Male E. So it's not so much about speeding up DHT, it's about slowing down your estrogen metabolism so that you have more of a healthy pool to convert into DHT. So if you look at Male E on our website, you're welcome to grab that or just look at the ingredients. You might already have them in your pantry, you know, in other supplements. So that's what I would recommend. It's not so much about speeding up the DHT, it's more about slowing down estrogen conversion so you have more free-flowing testosterone to utilize. Best zinc, honestly, it's more of a commodity, you know. So unlike nitric oxide, where I'm being very specific about what brand to buy, zinc, vitamin C, vitamin D, these are commodities, you know. It's more about you know, quality control and cleanliness and heavy metals. So just pick a brand like Pure, Thorn, you know, AOR, Designs for Health, some of the professional grade brands, because you'll just know that the processing means that it's a sort of virgin territory, clean quality goods that haven't been impurified with heavy metals and such, right? So it's not so much about the zinc itself, it's more about the processing, because zinc is zinc. It's a commodity. All right. All right, guys. Oh, thank you. Oh, you're welcome. Terry sees a coach in her future. I'd recommend, while this is fresh in your mind, get on a call with Jason. Not necessarily like if you say in your future, don't have to pull the trigger, but at least understand it. The reason why I say that is because after today's call, you're going to start doing things, right? And you might do well with certain things, you might get frustrated with certain things, and this is where people fall off and fail, right? So at least if you have a call with Jason, you'll understand what's possible and what things you can just go run off and do on your own for the next little while you're figuring out what to do. Of course, you know, Jason isn't a coach himself. He's just helping you learn about what's possible. So I would recommend get that call out of the way, so at least you can make your plan properly how you're going to take the next few months and what you're going to do, right? All right, guys, good evening. Great questions. I'm happy that we were able to dive deeper with you guys and hopefully you learned something. And I can see this light reflecting. That's my light that I use, by the way, because this room's too dark. So again, thank you for joining us. Thoughts, questions, you have Jason's email. We'll leave this open for a minute just in case you didn't get a chance to write it down. Anything else beyond what maybe something I didn't even bring up that you need to know, email us. You know, we're here to support. And we hope this is beneficial. We hope we're able to show you how to use your genome to solve your problems. It's not limited to what we're telling you. Other things you need to work on can also be worked on if you know how this thing works, this body that you work around on. So thank you guys again. Good evening and enjoy implementing this stuff. Good night.
Thank you, sir. We appreciate it. Thank you all very much.